Hello everybody and welcome to the Fragrance Report, a podcast where we explore the interconnectedness of art, history, and perfume. I'm your host Anya, and in today's episode we're going to be revisiting the 2025 perfume bottles auction. As many of you remember, this was a centennial event, or rather a centennial celebratory event for the 1925 Paris exhibition. The 1925 Paris exhibition is also known as the birthplace for Art Deco design, and a few episodes ago we covered the exhibition and we also dove into a few of the lots or a few of the articles of perfume that were available at the auction. In this episode we're going to go into some more items that were available at the auction and run through some of the final price for some of these fragrances, because a lot of the perfumes that were sold at this particular auction actually fetched a higher price than was initially expected. So I figured we'd just dive into this auction a little bit further and explore some more. But if this is your first time listening to the podcast, let me just let you know that this podcast launches a new episode every single Wednesday on Spotify and on YouTube, so you're able to follow the episode on both platforms. And if you're also interested in seeing more from me, you can check out my YouTube channel where I publish videos 5 times a week, Monday through Friday. I talk about all things fragrance, from fragrance news, talking about my preferences, and even doing some reviews for you as well, so be sure to check out my YouTube channel too. So with that being said, we have a lot to get to, so let's get into it. As usual, we're going to kick things off with my fragrance favorites. These are the perfumes that I've been wearing non-stop over the past week, scents that have really stood out to me, starting off with the one that is probably the oldest fragrance in my collection, or at least the oldest fragrance in this selection here, which is L'Imperatrice by Dolce & Gabbana. I've had this for longer than any one of these other fragrances. This has truly been a classic in my fragrance rotation. It's a perfume that has this lovely, refreshing quality to it. It's ozonic, fruity, there's some watermelon, cyclamen, kiwi in this fragrance, and there's also a bit of rhubarb that adds a slight tart contrast to the fragrance that I really, really love. And what I like about this is that it kind of is like a body spray, meaning that it's not going to be that intense, it's not going to be a heavy hitting fragrance, but it's going to linger. So this is kind of a perfume that I like to use as a body spray. So I like to spray this on literally all over myself and then layer some other fragrances alongside it. One of my favorite ways to layer this has been with a newer favorite of mine. This is Anello by Pernoire. You might have already heard me talk about this fragrance because, to be honest, I've been featuring this a lot, but it's truly been one of my favorite fragrances lately. It's a gorgeous mango pineapple perfume with a bit of a ginger accent, and there's also some magnolia here, but despite the slight floral aspect of this perfume, it still retains its primarily fruity aroma. So this is definitely going to be a fruity fragrance first and foremost. Then it has some other accents as well. What I like about this is that you have that fruitiness, but there's also a bit of spiciness to this with that ginger accord that I absolutely love here. So this paired with L'Imperatrice by Dolce & Gabbana, stunning combination. Another fragrance that's also been a perfume I have been revisiting lately has been Love at First Sight by Une Nuit Nomade. This is one of my favorite fragrances, and I actually wore earlier today. It is such a gorgeous perfume, has a beautiful lilac tone to it. There's also some ambroxan and passion fruit, which adds a nice fruitiness to it. It's very rare in my mind to find a lilac fragrance that also lingers, that isn't too heady, that isn't too cloyingly sweet, that isn't too florally, if you know what I mean. This one is a modern take on the lilac scent because of that passion fruit, because of that ambroxan. This fragrance also does an amazing job traveling. It's a beautiful perfume with a stunning sillage. So this is a fragrance I am quickly using up. In fact, I would say give it another year and this will be completely empty and I'll have to get another bottle. But I love this perfume. I've loved it for years and I'm happy to be reintroducing it into the rotation. Another fragrance that I've also been loving, if you've watched any of my shorts, any of my content, any of my TikTok videos, even Instagram, you might have seen this fragrance be heavily featured across those social media platforms because it truly is a fragrance that I have been obsessed over. And A Grove by the Sea Arquiste is one of those perfumes that, yes, it's a bit woody, yes, it's a bit aromatic, but there are some notes in here that are a little bit more unique, such as the olive. You don't really see olive that much. You see fig, you see saltiness somewhat, and those are notes that also feature in this, but the olive is really the unique part of this fragrance because it is like this buttery, oily olive that ends up smelling to me like olive oil, and that's something I really love. There's something light, refreshing, kind of oceanic about this, but it's not anything that's beachy. This is giving to me kind of something more Mediterranean. I love this perfume so much. To be quite honest with you, I've been wearing this perfume a lot when I want to relax, when I'm in situations where I want to have a, relaxed demeanor, when I want to feel like I know what I'm doing. I have been wearing this perfume. Whether that be at work or in my personal life, doesn't matter. This has been the go-to fragrance for me. I like how it lasts throughout the day. I think I mentioned in a previous video how I would like it to be stronger because I love how this smells so much, and I do believe that somehow is relatively the case, but I think that the lightness of this perfume is also an asset to this fragrance because it never is a cloying perfume. It's never going to be overwhelming. This is just a consistently beautiful fragrance. It just smells really delicious, and I absolutely love it. Then last but certainly not least, I have another fragrance by Une Nuit Nomade. This is called Estrella de la Mañana. This is a really interesting perfume because the more I smell it, the more I discover about this particular fragrance. And to put it very simply, this is a vanilla and chocolate fragrance, but dig a little bit deeper and you'll find that it has something like a leathery accord. The chocolate is a little bit bitter. It smells a little bit like a sipping chocolate, like a melted chocolate. There is so much complexity and nuance to this fragrance. Something else that I realized whenever I started wearing this perfume was that on the skin it has like this bright quality to it that makes it a little bit more complex than the initial scent pyramid might make you think. And I have just been so fascinated by this. This is going to be one of my summer nights fragrances, and I have been wearing it on and off throughout the week. I really enjoy it, but I feel like it does best when you're in a bit of a breeze, when it's a little bit cooler, but I will continue wearing this as long as I can. As I mentioned previously, this auction was being run by the International Perfume Bottles Association, spearheaded by Kevin Leach. Now, Leach has been collecting perfumes since the 1960s. He's also been selling fragrances since the 1960s as well. At the time, he ran Handlebar Antiques in Hollywood, and he is one of the first, I would say, modern antique dealers to really see the artistry behind these perfume bottles and work to launch this preservation, or rather this conservation project, to make sure that these bottles are able to be preserved throughout time. And he also runs this as a bit of a conservation project. He's able to use this platform every year to showcase these fragrance bottles, but also encourage the conservation of these articles of history. In fact, this 2025 auction year featured 149 items. Some items even date back to the 1900 Paris Universal Exhibition, which we talked about last week, and then others even dated back to the Gilded era of the 1920s and 30s. And many of these articles have actually also been left untouched for over a century. So obviously, there's a lot of interesting history that goes into this auction. One of the absolute stars of the auction this year was this selection of perfumes from the House of Ybri. Now, Ybri was once considered the priciest perfume house in the world. Its founder, Simon Yaroslavsky, filed for bankruptcy during the Great Depression, but these bottles remain as symbols of opulence. The bottles themselves were created by the renowned Baccarat and were extremely complex to create, utilizing a process similar to first stage pecking glass, where one glass is laid over another to create a luminous color over opaque white. And the bottles themselves actually end up selling for quite a bit of money. Now, the orange colored bottle, which you see in the attached photo, was considered one of the most rare bottles in this collection, and it sold for a whopping $54,000. This fragrance bottle held the fragrance Guess. The bottle in pink over white, representing ruby, held the fragrance Heart's Desire, which also was described as Désir du Coeur, and this was sold for $17,500. And all of these bottles are just 7¾ inches tall and come with matching glass stopper covers surrounded by gilt metal and bejeweled frames. Not everything at this auction was perfume related. One of the other highlights that I absolutely want to touch on would be the Revlon lipstick dolls. These little figures stood at only 5 inches tall and were crafted with materials such as real fur and velvet. And I do think that it's worth for us to go back into the history of these dolls. Now, during the post-war period in America, which is the late 1940s and early 1950s, Revlon was at the height of its influence, and their lipsticks and nail polishes were becoming all the rage and were being sold throughout the United States. So that's why they created these dolls, or rather les girls, as a playful way of promoting these iconic lipsticks. Each doll was actually functional. There were lipsticks dressed cleverly as miniature fashion icons, and they chose some elegant outfits with things like chinchilla fur, genuine mink, fox fur. These standing figurines mimic the silhouettes of Broadway stars, Parisian models, and hidden inside of these dolls was a lipstick bullet for each doll. So these dolls were expected to go for between $800 and $1,200 each, but they sold for a final price of $4,800. Pretty steep markup, but these dolls look absolutely lovely, and I think that the condition of these looks really good, especially considering how old they are, and especially considering that these are so teeny tiny and they're in part made of fur. I think this is absolutely fascinating. Fragrantica actually covered the event and did interview Kevin Leach for an article of theirs, which I've linked down below, and he did provide a quote for the article, which I will read a part of now. "My annual auction is a year-long endeavor. We get bottles from all corners of the world, and we strive to represent only the rarest of bottles and in the best possible condition. Even better if they still have the original fragrance and have remained sealed. The success of the 2025 auction is gratifying because I see a trend growing amongst serious collectors and museums that are starting to realize the historic value and the artistry behind these perfume presentations. When we talk about commercial bottles from the first half of the 20th century, we know each perfume bottle has a story to tell and was conceived at a time when creativity was at its peak. To create such wonderful bottles for wide commercial purposes would almost bankrupt perfume houses in today's world. Still, I would like to see not just a trend from perfume or fashion houses wanting to rescue some of their heritage, but also put more effort into how they bottle their fragrances. I see great potential there. Fashion houses that have made a comeback like Schiaparelli have a rich perfume history. It would be great to see them reinterpret their perfume history as they are reinterpreting their fashions. Think about the wonderful perfume bottle designs that could come from a fashion designer or fashion creators like Alessandro Michel, Jonathan Anderson, Jacques Mousse, etc. I wish we could move beyond this trend of plain square or minimalistic bottles in the contemporary perfume market. I do want to thank our loyal global following and the IPBA for their continued support and trust in the perfume bottles auction, and for helping to preserve these vials full of history and at times full of perfume. I do think he makes a lot of really interesting points, and many of these points are things that I've been saying on social media for the last few years. There's such a gap in the market for really thoughtful and innovative bottle designs, and for brands to really focus on the entire story, or rather the entire experience of the fragrance, not just the juice inside. One of the most interesting upsells from this auction is this next set of items, a collection of 3 Josephine Baker Fix Brilliant jars from the 1920s. 2 of which were intact, sealed with the contents, some of which have evaporated over time. Josephine Baker was a famous American dancer and singer. She found her great fame as an immigrant from the U.S. to France. She even worked as a counterintelligence agent in World War II in the Vichy-occupied Paris, and later worked as part of the French resistance in northern Africa. And she continues to have a steadfast place in history as a cultural icon. Today, Josephine Baker is well renowned and respected as a cultural icon, as I previously mentioned, so this immense popularity was of course reflected in the final sale of these artifacts. So this group of jars, which was expected to fetch between $600 to $800, sold for a final price of $28,125. Some other items we talked about in our previous episode was the Lubin Fumé bottle, which was designed to be a group of cigarettes in a package. This sold for a final price of $6,250. And then we also had that rare 1920s Depenoix Glassworks bottle, which featured embossed marks and molded red jewels. It was 5 inches high. This was expected to sell for between $2,000 to $3,000, and the final selling price was $6,600. Another really interesting item from the auction was an unusual coral-colored Czech perfume bottle from the 1920s. This depicted maiden figurines on either side with a rock formation in the center and an ivy leaf-inspired stopper on top. This bottle is only 4.5 inches high. It was expected to sell for between $4,000 to $5,000, when in reality it sold for $18,000. The next bottle I like to spotlight is a Cartier hand-engraved crystal bottle on a silver stand. This artifact had a black and red enamel cap. This bottle stood only 8 inches high and had elaborate scenes depicted on all sides. This bottle is thought to have been made around 1920, and the estimated price for the bottle was between $5,000 to $7,000. The final selling price was $27,000. This auction definitely had many fascinating items that I haven't even mentioned in this video. I just scratched the surface here. Of course, I'll be linking some more information about the auction down below, but I do think it's really wonderful to see an increased interest in fragrance history and preserving it, especially when we think about how small and how delicate these artifacts are. It must have been so difficult to preserve a large amount of all these perfume bottles, because these are items that you would like kind of stash in a cupboard, stash in a drawer, kind of forget about. And it's wonderful to see so many of these items pop up in amazing condition, and better yet, be appreciated for the pieces of history that they are. Let me know, are there any particular items in this auction that you found really, really compelling? I, for one, was very interested in the lipstick dolls. I feel like I might actually explore some more Revlon items in a future podcast episode if you guys would like to see that. They were known for so much more than lipstick. They were known for their fire and ice advertising. They were, of course, known for some of their fragrances, which I have covered briefly in previous episodes of the Fragrance Report as well. But if you haven't already, be sure to check back on the episode that we did 2 weeks ago, talking about the catalog of this very auction before it went up. So if you're interested in learning more about some of these fragrances, definitely revisit that episode if you would like to explore some more options. But with that being said, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Fragrance Report. I hope you found it interesting, and I will see you in next week's episode. Bye. This episode's music was brought to you by Kevin McLeod over at Incompetech. This is Beauty Flow by Kevin McLeod at Incompetech.com and is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license.